end of the driveway, and the host of the house said, take one piece, and maybe it's the individual who kind of reach in and, 4, thank you. Gets a handful. But it didn't really matter. It wasn't, the percentage didn't change based on an individual or a group. Sometimes the group was worse. That first person takes 4, and you're like, well, I can take 6. And the greed just gets a little, and even in that example, we're getting into this combination, the powerful dual influence of greed and envy and how they work together. Greed says, man, I need more and more and more. And envy doesn't just say, I need more. It says, if I can't have it, I don't want you to have it. And there's greed and envy both in the story of Ananias and Sapphira. The issue isn't the amount of money they gave to the church. Understand that. The issue is the disunity that they were causing by saying, I don't want him to have more influence than me. It ought to be me who has this position of power and influence and that people look up to. And it's just that that combination of greed and envy, and one author described it like this. He said, it's really a violation of one of the 10 commandments of do not covet your neighbor's house. Exodus 20:17 says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey or anything that belongs to the neighbor. And he goes on to say, well, isn't it crazy that this idea of do not covet, that's one of the top 10 commandments with do not murder and do not commit adultery and do not build idols before me. I mean, there's some really serious stuff in the 10 commandments. Do not covet. Don't be greedy or envious of others. That same author goes on to say that greed and envy, it can be deadly. As we're finding out, it had something to do with Cain killing Abel and something to do with religious leaders killing Jesus. Greed and envy are similar but distinct. Chances are most of us are prone to one over the other. See which one strikes closest to home for you. Greed is having more. Envy is about being more. Greed is about more for you. Envy is about less for your neighbor. Greed delights in your good fortune. Envy delights in your neighbor's misfortune. Greed is about stuff. Envy is about status. Greed prompts us to compare ourselves to others. Envy prompts us to compete with others. Both of these sins cause us to look across the fence in our neighbor's backyard and conclude that his grass is greener than ours. Greed and envy seeped its way into the early church, and we have to take seriously the depth of our own sin. We do the same thing, by the way, with sin. We compare ourselves to those around us, and we don't realize that the consequence is the same. You go back and read Genesis chapter 6 and the story of Noah. It's the beginning of that story. And just think for a moment about where the creator of the universe has to be to say, I'm going to get rid of it all. I'm going to wipe it all out. Have you ever found maybe like an art project you made when you were a kid and your mom sent it away? It's not staying at my house, and you packed it away and you brought it out. Or my mom tried to pawn off these shop projects to me a few years ago. You made this in shop class, and why don't you take this home? And I'm like, just throw it away. Nobody wants that. Right? But there's a part of me that's just like, oh, yeah. Why don't you want it, Mom? Like, I spent at least 45 minutes working on that. Right? This little thing that we created, and sometimes it's kind of hard to get rid of it. Well, the creator of the universe said, wiping it out. Romans chapter 6, verse 23 says, for the wages of sin is death. The wages of sin is death. We read this story about Ananias and Sapphira and we think God overreacted. I mean, God, come on, take a deep breath. Do you know what Ananias and Sapphira got? They got what we all deserve. I mean, be careful, because this week I was like, oh yeah, Ananias and Sapphira, they got what they deserve. Right? Well, that's true. But more than that, they got what I deserve. the depth of sin in my life is no more shallow. Right? The consequences are no less. We have to take seriously the depth of our own sin. And oh, by the way, what it cost for that forgiveness, that Jesus died on the cross in our place. Warning number 2 is to take seriously your role on the team and the power of His grace. Look at verses 11 to the end of verse 16. And great fear came upon the whole church and upon all who heard these things. Now many signs and wonders were regularly done among the people by the hands of the apostles, and they were all together in Solomon's portico. None of the rest dared to join them, but the people held them in high esteem, and more than ever believers were added to the Lord, multitudes of both men and women, so that they even carried out the sick into the streets and laid them on cots and mats, that as Peter came by, at least his shadow might fall on some of them. The people also gathered from the towns around Jerusalem, bringing the sick and those afflicted with unclean spirits, and they were all healed. They heard about the power of God, and they witnessed the power of God at work in the believers, and they saw it in their own lives. There's 3 groups of people in this section of Scripture that I think we have to deal with. The first group of people is in verse 12, and they were all together in Solomon's porch and Solomon's portico. They were all together. They kept meeting together in worship and service and loving one another. Understand what just happened. I mean, 2 people died in the last worship service, and they were back the next day. They kept coming to serve one another and to love one another. And folks, wherever you are, whatever season of life you are in, whatever's going on around you, you have a position to play on His team, and it's life and death. Not just for you, but for everyone else. There's this guy, a friend of mine, he's been a important part of the body and life of Wallula Christian Church for as long as I've been here and for many years before I got here. His name's Dave Coleman. And some of you in the room know Dave. Many of you know Dave. Dave is a guy who, I mean, if you don't know that he's praying for you, he's praying for you. Dave is a guy, my favorite Dave Coleman story is that, you know, Dave can fix anything. He's that guy, and I'm a guy who can't fix anything. And so I learned very quickly to become friends with Dave Coleman. And we were installing a new washer and dryer at our house. This is many, many years ago. And we loaded it downstairs and we put it in, and one thing went right and one thing didn't go right, and we can't get it to hook up and work right. And I'm about ready. I'm praying already, but my prayer is a selfish one. I'm like, you're a preacher, don't cuss in front of this guy. You're a preacher, don't cuss in front of this guy. Right? That's my prayer. And then Dave, he bangs the washer or dryer. I don't even remember which one it was. And he bangs the washer and dryer. It wasn't really in anger. He just banged it. He said, we need to stop and pray. And I said, oh yeah, that's what I was thinking too, Dave. That's right. I mean, that's who Dave Coleman is. And Dave Coleman has served here for many, many years, and he's retired. He's earned the right to kick back and relax, right? Isn't that what it's supposed to be? He's moving in June to be a full-time missionary in Honduras. Right? In June 2nd, we're going to have a celebration for Dave. We're going to pray over him, commission him, send him off, and there'll be some stuff, you know. He doesn't want it. He told me today, you know, we don't have to do that. And I'm like, it's out of my hands, Dave. I can't. This is by me, all right? There's folks that I have to live with when you're gone. So we're going to do this. And so, but that's going to happen. We want you to be a part of that. But just know, I just use him as an example. And he hates it. But man, whatever season of life you're in. I mean, this guy we just read about, the guy leaping and jumping in the temple. At the end of his story, I love this. It says he's 40 years old. Like, he's so old, nobody believed this could happen. Right? Dave is somewhat older than 40. Full-time missionary. Whatever season of life you're in, there's a position for you to play on his team, on Jesus' mission. And it's life and death. Then the other folks here, some dared not join them. Just understand there's some folks, they see the power and the authority and the holiness of God, and they're not at a point yet where they know what to do with their sin in their life. And so they think, we've got to stay away, and just continue to love on them and continue to love one another and allow them to see through your life the power of Jesus. That's what happens in this story. And more people come, multitudes of both men and women. This is such a significant phrase. It's the first time in the history of the world, really, that I know of, where individuals, where women especially, were allowed to sort of make their own spiritual decision. And all it teaches us is that it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter what you've done, it doesn't matter your nation of origin, it doesn't matter your socioeconomic status, none of those things that the world sometimes stacks up and we're comparing each other and greed and envy get involved and we say this is important or that's important. None of it matters. What matters is your conviction, your decision. And it's a serious one, life and death, for you to say yes to following Jesus. If you need on this day to say yes for the first time, to be baptized in Jesus' name, to say yes to Him, I just want you to write the word added on your welcome home card. We're going to talk to you this week and help you take those steps. More and more people were added. They came to service and to love Jesus together. Sherry and I, a long time ago, I was youth pastor. Sherry worked all the time in youth ministry with me and probably worked harder than me. But that's a story for another day. And we were driving home from a mission trip in Mexico. Every year we did this mission trip in Mexico with high school students. We built a house. And then this one year in Tijuana, Mexico, there was a hurricane that was making its way toward land. And they said, look, you guys don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Get out, And so we were packing everything up, torrential rain, just rain. And we're packing all this. We stayed in tents, and so all this camping gear. And it was wet, and so we're packing it up and we put it in a trailer, and we have this giant barrel in this trailer full of drinking water still, and we get on the road, and I tell you that will be important later, and we head back towards San Diego. We get into San Diego, and it's just raining and pouring, and the storm's coming, and nobody else got the memo because the highways are just packed, and it's rush hour kind of traffic, and we're driving along 50 or 55, 60 miles an hour, just kind of bumper to bumper going, because you got to go. And you just got to go to keep up with everybody else, and you got to go. And then we were going until we weren't, and we stopped. And I slammed on the brakes. We got 3 vans, and kids packed into each one of these vans. And I slam on the brakes, and the van in front of me slams on the brakes. And I'm like, I'm not stopping. And we're on this off ramp, and we're still not stopping. And so I swerve off onto the side of the off ramp, all the side there was. And finally, the van slows to a stop. And as I stop, we tap. This is the story I told the elders. We tap the guardrail along the off-ramp, and one of the voice from this teenage girl in the back seat, it's always from the back seat, said, "Are we hanging off the edge?" I said, "No. We're not off the edge, and do not tell your mother that we were hanging off the edge, Don't spread this around anywhere." We truly weren't. We were perfectly safe. But it's one of those situations where we were perfectly safe until we weren't. It could have gone differently. We find ourselves in those, on occasion, life and death situations. Guys, just know that this life, this mission with Jesus, that it's more than just something we do on a Sunday morning. It's more than a checkbox or just something to keep the peace in the family. That it has life and death consequences. Let's stand and worship Him.
Darkness we were waiting, without hope, without light, till from heaven you came running. till that stone was moved for good, for the Lamb had conquered death. And the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe, for the souls of all who come to the Father are restored. And the church of Christ was born, then the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of old shall not kneel, shall not faint. By his blood and in his name, in his freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise forever to the King of Kings. So glad to worship with you all this morning. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next week.